For centuries, the Ark of the Covenant was at the center of Israelite tradition. It was brought into Solomon's temple and placed in its innermost sanctuary. But when the story moves beyond the first temple, the Ark is no longer clearly there. No surviving account tells us exactly where it went. So what really happened to the Ark? To understand why its disappearance became such a mystery, we first have to understand what the Ark was supposed to be. In the biblical tradition, the Ark was a sacred chest associated with the covenant between God and Israel. It was not described as an ordinary container. It was part of the central ritual life of ancient Israel, and its movements were closely connected to major moments in the story. By the time of Solomon, the Ark had become the most important sacred object inside the temple. According to 1 Kings, priests carried it into the inner sanctuary, the most holy place, beneath the wings of the cherubim. The text even specifies what was inside it, the stone tablets associated with the covenant. In other words, when the Ark disappears from the story, this is not the disappearance of an ordinary artifact. It is the disappearance of an object that the tradition had placed at the very center of Israel's sacred world.
But the Ark had already traveled a long and complicated road before it reached Jerusalem. The biblical narrative connects it to Shiloh, then to a series of conflicts involving the Philistines, before it eventually came to rest at Kiriath Jearim. That location is especially interesting because Kiriath Jearim is not simply a name preserved in a text. The site has also been investigated archaeologically. Excavations at Kiriath Jearim have revealed substantial remains from the Iron Age, and researchers have specifically examined the site in relation to the biblical tradition that connects it with the Ark. But there is an important distinction. Archaeology can investigate the settlement, its chronology, its buildings, and the historical world surrounding the tradition. It does not mean that archaeologists have discovered the Ark itself. In fact, scholars Israel Finkelstein and Thomas Romer have argued that parts of the Ark narrative may preserve memories shaped by the political world of the 8th century BCE, particularly around the transfer of the Ark from Shiloh to Kiriath Jearim. That does not prove the entire narrative happened exactly as described, but it gives us something extremely valuable: historical context.
Eventually, the Ark reaches Jerusalem. And this is where the story should become simple. Solomon builds the temple. The Ark is brought into it. And according to 1 Kings, it is placed in the most holy place, behind the inner sanctuary. For the biblical account, this is the Ark at the height of its importance. It is no longer moving between settlements. It has reached the center of the kingdom's sacred life. The story seems to have arrived at its destination. And then, centuries later, something changes. The first temple is destroyed. A second temple is eventually built, and the Ark is no longer clearly part of the story. And this is where the mystery begins. The biblical account gives us a detailed picture of the Ark inside Solomon's temple. But when the story moves into the Second Temple period, that same Ark is no longer presented as an object standing in the sanctuary. Later Jewish tradition remembered the Second Temple as lacking several of the sacred objects associated with the First Temple, including the Ark. But notice what that does not tell us. It does not tell us when the Ark disappeared. It does not tell us who removed it, and it does not tell us whether it was destroyed, hidden, carried away, or preserved somewhere else. The most obvious explanation seems easy. Jerusalem was conquered. The temple was destroyed. So perhaps the Ark was simply taken as part of the spoils. But there is a problem. The sources do not actually give us that answer.
The Babylonian conquest is therefore the obvious suspect. Jerusalem was conquered. The first temple was destroyed. Valuable objects were taken from it. So it is easy to imagine the Ark disappearing in the same catastrophe. But history has to separate what seems likely from what is actually recorded. The biblical descriptions of the Babylonian destruction list sacred and royal objects taken from Jerusalem. Yet they do not give us a clear statement saying that Nebuchadnezzar seized the Ark. And that matters, because once we look for a direct ancient statement saying the Ark was taken by Babylon, the certainty disappears. This leaves us with an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the Ark disappeared during the Babylonian destruction, but maybe it had already disappeared before Babylon ever arrived.
One of the strangest clues appears centuries before the Babylonian destruction. During the reign of King Josiah, the second book of Chronicles contains an instruction to the Levites: put the holy ark in the temple built by Solomon. At first, that sounds ordinary. But if the ark was already supposed to be in the temple, why give the instruction at all? Some interpreters have seen this as a clue that the ark had been moved, removed, or otherwise displaced before Josiah's reforms. Another passage in Jeremiah looks even stranger. It looks toward a future in which people will no longer speak of the ark or remember it as before. These passages have encouraged arguments that the ark may have disappeared well before the Babylonian destruction. But this is where we need to be careful. These passages do not give us a confirmed historical account of what happened. They are clues that have been interpreted in different ways. And once again, the evidence gives us a possibility, not a final answer.
And eventually, an ancient tradition gives the Ark a completely different fate. A text known as 2nd Maccabees, written centuries after the events it describes, tells a story in which the prophet Jeremiah takes the Ark, the sacred tent, and the incense altar to a mountain and hides them inside a cave. According to that tradition, the entrance is sealed, and the location is meant to remain unknown until a future time. It is an extraordinary story, but it is also a perfect example of why this mystery is so difficult. This is not a contemporary report from the time of Jeremiah. It is a later tradition about what supposedly happened to the sacred objects. And other traditions go even further. In Ethiopian tradition, the Ark is associated with Aksum and the story of Menelik, the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. The tradition remains deeply important within Ethiopian religious culture, but the existence of a powerful tradition is not the same as independent evidence that the original Ark has been physically verified there.
So after all the stories, what can history actually tell us? We can say that the Ark is deeply embedded in the biblical tradition. We can reconstruct the places and historical settings surrounding its story. Archaeologists can investigate sites such as Kiryat Jearim and the broader world of Iron Age Israel and Judah. But archaeology has not produced a verified Ark. We cannot establish exactly when the physical object disappeared. We cannot establish who removed it. We cannot prove that Babylon took it. And we cannot independently verify that the object claimed to survive in Aksum today is the original Ark described in the ancient tradition. What we have instead is a hierarchy of certainty. Some parts belong to ancient textual tradition. Some can be studied through archaeology and historical context. Some are later interpretations, and some are traditions whose claims remain unverified.
The Ark of the Covenant is one of history's strangest mysteries, precisely because we can trace its story so far, and then suddenly we can't. We can follow its place in biblical tradition. We can examine the ancient landscapes connected to that tradition. We can study later interpretations, concealment stories, and claims of survival. But none of them gives us the one thing the mystery seems to demand:
definitive evidence of the Ark's final fate. Maybe it was destroyed. Maybe it was hidden. Maybe it was removed long before Jerusalem fell. We simply do not have enough evidence to choose one answer with confidence. And perhaps that is the real mystery of the Ark. Not that history gives us no story, but that it gives us several, and no final piece of evidence capable of closing the case. For now, the Ark remains exactly where history leaves it, between evidence, tradition, and the unknown.